Okay. Good afternoon, students. You are welcome to today's facilitation. This is day 5 or week 5 of our facilitation. This is week 5 of our facilitation. So the 5th week of our facilitation is today. So last week was week 4 of our facilitation. Today is week 6 of our week 5 of our facilitation. And I expect that you have to be very, very serious because after next week is 6th week of facilitation, and that's we end our facilitation. So today is week 5 of our facilitation, Bio 307. That is evolution. Last week we looked, which was week 4, we looked at polyploidy. We defined polyploidy. We also did evolution or origin of polyploidy. We also looked at types of polyploidy. We looked at importance of polyploidy. We looked at polyploidy, which is having more than 2 sets of chromosomes in a cell. That's how we define polyploidy. We looked at polyploidy in plants and polyploidy in animals. And then we also looked at advantages and disadvantages of polyploidy. That was what we did in week 4. So today is week 5. We're also going to look at, in week 5, we're going to look at adaptation and speciation. We define adaptation, we define speciation, we look at importance of adaptation, we also look at importance of speciation, then we look at phylogeny, then we do classification of phylogeny, and we look at geologic periods. We may not be able to finish everything, but at least we'll go far today. So let's look at adaptation. Adaptation in living organisms. So adaptation is the biological process where organisms adjust to their environment over generations through natural selection, thereby enhancing survival and reproduction of the organism. So the inherited traits can be structural, it can be physiological, it can be behavioral. So let's look at it again. Adaptation. We say adaptation is the biological process whereby organisms adjust to their environment over generation through natural selection. For example, when we did the characteristics of living things, we used the memory tip, Mr. D. Niger. And adaptation, ability to adapt, is one of the characteristics of living organisms. If you cannot adapt, that means you cannot survive. For example, if you move now from the eastern part of the country to the extreme north, you have to adapt to the weather there. The extreme sunshine, probably the cold condition. If you move towards there to Niger Republic, you see a kind of desert area. So you have to adapt because it's characterized by high sunshine. Now, if you cannot adapt, then you will not be able to survive there. Then you can also move from there to Europe. You can move to London, you can move to Ireland. Of course, sometimes the temperature there is very, the temperature over there becomes -7, -10. So you need to adapt to that particular condition. Otherwise, you will die. You will not be able to survive. So also people in that European area, when they come to Africa, because of the harsh sunshine, most of them will have to undergo or adapt certain features that enable them to survive under that high sunshine. So adaptation is very, very important. If you move to a hilly area, some people are living in a very high altitude. You have to adapt to that high altitude. Some people are living in a forested region, forested area, where they move in between the forest. Organisms over there have to what? Adapt. Some people are living in a water area, water area, like people living in Bayelsa, waterlogged area. They also adapt to that particular condition of the environment. So that's why you say that adaptation is a biological phenomenon, is a biological process where organisms adjust to their environment. You have to adjust to that environment. So over generation, because this thing happens over generation through natural selection, thereby enhancing survival and what? Reproduction. If you pick a fish from a salt environment and keep in a freshwater environment, that fish will not be able to survive because of the features of the freshwater and the saltwater environment. But then some organisms live in the brackish environment where there is a combination of fresh water and salt water. They have to adapt to that kind of brackish water habitat. So adaptation is a very, very important feature of organisms. And then as a result of adaptation, there are some inherited traits. Inherited traits. You inherit some traits as you adapt to this new environment. Something like giraffe. Because giraffe live in a very, in a desert condition, desert area, where we only have shrubs. As a result of a continuous trying to pick up the shrubs in a tall shrubs to pick up the leaves, giraffe has to develop long neck. And then these traits continue to pass on from one giraffe to another giraffe. So it's an adaptation. Now, it can also be physiological, either metabolic or biochemical. So adaptation can occur in that way. It can also be in form of behavior. Sometimes you see migration. Sometimes you see hunting. So organisms migrate to adapt. When the weather becomes so much, they are migrate. They leave that area. Like cattle egrets, he migrates to Nigeria at a particular season and also disappear at a particular season. Even some animals, they move in group. Even fishes, they migrate. For example, salmon migrates to areas where they lay eggs. And then after some time, they return back. When that eggs that are laid develop to young ones or fertilized, a time comes when they now migrate to their parents' area where their parent came from. So this is all about what? Adaptation. Now, we want to look at what are the importance of adaptation. This adaptation we are talking about, is it of any importance? Is it of any significance? One has to ask. Then the answer is yes. Because without adaptation, you will not be able to survive. So adaptation is very, very important. So what is adaptation? It's a biological process where organisms adjust to the environment. Okay, we are looking at the what? The significance of adaptation. One is survival in changing environment. Organisms must adapt to survive in a given environment. That's one of the significant, one of the importance of adaptation. You survive. Anywhere you are taking, you survive. Even if you travel from here to Ireland, you must survive. If you travel from here to China, you survive. If you travel from here to Australia, you survive. So one of the importance of adaptation is that it helps in survival in the changing environment. Because of climatic change, things are changing. Environment are changing. Weather conditions are changing. And so you must adapt. Otherwise, you become extinct. Otherwise, your generation will be wiped out. So that's why adaptation is very, very important. The second advantage of adaptation is that it makes the resource, it helps in access to resources, resource access. So adaptive traits, e.g. camouflage, allow organisms to better utilize available food. So when you adapt, you can access the what? The resources available there. For example, some organisms camouflage. Why do they camouflage? A green snake in a green grass. Why does he do that? So that the resources available in that environment can be what? Organisms will be able to what? Take it. Animals will be able to what? Take those organisms because they adapt so that they can survive. Resources can be available to them. That's why camouflage. That's why organisms camouflage. So you think that they are not there, especially in the aquatic ecosystem. If you go towards the bed, the ground, or what we call the bed, the sea bed or the ocean bed or the river bed, you see some organisms that adapt and becomes like rock. Some becomes like mud. All these shapes, those that live in crevices, they adapt. Those that lives in plant area in the water body, they adapt. They change color so that a fish swimming in that area will never dreamt that there is predator there. So it makes resources available to what? Organisms. Now, another advantage, number 3, is survival of the fittest. That is it. I hope you remember the man that propounded that theory of survival of the fittest. I hope you remember him. I think his name was Jean Lamarck's. Jean Lamarck's theory of evolution. Theory of what? But it's not Jean Lamarck, but Darwin's theory. Darwin's theory of evolution. Theory of survival of the fittest, or what we call theory of natural selection, because the organisms that are best fitted, they are the ones that survive. The organisms that adapt well, they are the ones that survive. So that is survival of the fittest. Those that are not able to survive will die away. Do you understand? So even in a harsh environment, that's why some organisms camouflage so as to survive. So because of survival of the fittest, organisms have to what? Adapt to fit in that environment, to survive in that environment. Otherwise, they will die off. So that is adaptation. People that live in the desert area, they have to adapt so as to survive in that desert region. Otherwise, they will be wiped out. Their generation will be wiped out. So one of the advantages of adaptation is that it helps one in the because it helps one to survive because of the theory of survival of the fittest. The another one is predator protection. Predator protection. Now, the predator can camouflage, so it helps species to defend themselves. And what? The example is camouflage. Do you understand? So the predator can camouflage so that they will be able to protect themselves, so that the prey will not attack them, because they know they're hunting for the what? The prey. That's why some, if you watch the geographical channel, you see lion, how lion, they hide themselves, camouflage, even tiger, they camouflage, hide themselves so that they will be able to pounce on the predator, on the prey, and eat up the prey. Otherwise, they will not be able to succeed. So that's one advantage of adaptation. So it helps in long-term environmental resilience, allows species to survive change in the weather condition, allows species to survive shift in the weather condition. So resilience, long-term environmental resilience, long-term environmental, to withstand long-term environmental pressure, organisms have to what? Adapt. So you adapt so that you survive changes in the environment. So that's one importance of adaptation. You adapt so that even whether whether it has rained cat and dog, whether it has rained for 7 days without stopping, you must survive. Whether the sun has become so harsh that every other living organism in that environment is dying off, you must survive. You adapt in order to survive. So this long-term environmental resilience is one of the advantages of adaptation. Then let us look at speciation. So we have seen adaptation. We have seen advantages of adaptation. Of course, before we go to speciation, there can also be disadvantage of adaptation, because when you adapt, there's tendencies that you may leave your original characters and then imbibe the new character. You may leave your original endowment and now become endowed with the new environment. And even to turn back to that original one may become difficult. In fact, there is tendency for organism to even change the new species. That is the thing. There's tendency of even organisms to change to new species because they are now adapt and fit into the new environment. And then for them to reverse back to the original condition may become very difficult. Because when, for example, you start using your left hand for over a long period of time, a time when you come, you will begin to perfect in the using of your left hand that you can use it without knowing about it. That is theory, what do you call it? That is what we call, who is that man that developed that theory? That organisms can develop certain characters or structures and use it repeatedly without knowing about it, and then can repeat it without thinking about it. I think, who is that German scientist that the Pavlov is a Pavlov theory. Pavlov developed that theory. Conditioned reflex, theory of conditioned reflex. When you develop certain things and do it over a long period of time, you can get acquainted to it and you can do it repeatedly without knowing. It becomes part and parcel of your life. So that is the danger of adaptation. Now let's go to speciation. Speciation occurs when species diverges or give rise to two species, each of which continue on its own evolutionary pathway. So when organisms or when species diverges, they diverge and give rise to two or more species, each of which continues on its own evolutionary pathway. That is what we call what? Speciation. So it occurs when species diverges. So when you diverge, when organism species diverge to two or more species, then each of them can continue to on its own evolutionary pathway. It is the origin of evolution, evolution of new species. So organisms can diverge. They can diverge to, when one organism diverge to two species, two or more species, and each of them develops on its own evolutionary pathway, they can give rise to new species. That is what we call speciation. So even when you adapt in an environment, the next thing is what? Speciation. Speciation is that you can diverge. And as you diverge to two or more species, you can develop on your own evolutionary pathway and give rise to new species. That is the speciation. And so you have different types of mechanism of speciation. How does this speciation occur? One is called allopatric. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. Here, one organism divides into two separate organisms, and each of them develop on its own. So one organism divides into two different species, or divide into two, and each of them develops on its own. So that is allopatric. Is one that divides into two, and then develops, and then give rise to two or more, give rise to two species. So that one is what? Allopatric. One organism that divided into two and then begin to develop on its own. Then they want, so that is called allopatric. Then you have peripatric. peripatric. In this case, a small, in a habitat, here, remember that in allopatric, it is one habitat that divide into two, or one population that divide into two, and these two populations start developing. Then in peripatric is a small population. A population can isolate itself with just one single small one. We cut off from the original one, from the original population, and then begin to develop, because it is a small population that is get isolated from the original population and start developing. It's different from allopatric, because in allopatric is one population that divided into two, but in allopatric, in peripatric, it doesn't divide into two. It's just a small portion that comes out from the original population and begin to develop on its own, get isolated and begin to develop on its own. So let me use a village, for example. Your village may decide to divide themselves into two, and the two villages will start to develop, get a new name, and begin to develop on their own. That one is called allopatric speciation. Then in peripatric, it's not the entire village divided. One family will just get out of the village and go and settle just close to the village and call itself a small community, and they will start developing. That one is peripatric. Then in parapatric, what happens here is that small population enters new habitats. There's no physical separation. It's just like a village. Within that same village, a group now came out. They have not left the village, but they have carved out a separate community for themselves within that population, within that particular community. So that one is what? Parapatric. Now let me separate it again. Allopatric is when a particular population divided into two, and each of them will start developing. Then peripatric is when a small population isolate itself and move out and begin to develop on its own. They move out of that particular population. Then you have parapatric. Parapatric is that a new community may come out, but they have not left that village. They are still in that village, but they have carved out their own community there. So within the same village, they now carved out their own community. So within that population, another group of population arise, but then there is inflow, movement into that new population and out of that, within that particular population. Then you have sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation. In sympatric speciation, species diverge or form without geographical isolation or changes in the habitat. Another new group can come without, you still within the same population, but they have not gone out. So they still operate within that community, but they are now, they form their own group without leaving that community. So you have allopatric when the population divide into two and start developing differently. Then peripatric when a small group isolate themselves from that population, out of that population, and then start to live. There is no communication with that original population, even though there are small parts that are just carved out. Then parapatric, a small population carved out, but within the same population again, they have not left that population. There is still inflow, there is still interaction within the same population. They just carve themselves out and get themselves distinguished, but within the same population, within the same community. Then sympatric, they have not even carved themselves out, but they are still within the population and operating as a new population. That is sympatric speciation. Now, what are the importance of speciation? Remember that speciation occurs when one species diverges or give rise to two or more species, each of them continue on its own evolutionary pathway. It's just one species that diverges into two or three or more And then each of them will start developing on its own. And then we are given mechanism that is allopathic when a population divides into two and start developing. There's a peripatric when a small population carve itself out of that population entirely and start developing, but a very tiny group that carve itself out. Then parapatric, a small group separate, but they have not carved themselves. They are still within that population. There is interaction, there's exchange of everything, but they are still within that population, but they have carved themselves out. Sympatric, they have not carved themselves out, but they have operating as a different group within that population. Now, what are the importance of speciation? What are the importance of speciation? Speciation drives biodiversity. It creates biodiversity. It creates new species. It creates new organisms. It creates multiple organisms, therefore giving rise to new organisms. And that is increasing biodiversity. So it's an advantage. Increases diversity. It creates new species. Allow organisms to form new ones. So, and that's how biodiversity. That's why new organisms. And remember that biodiversity, bio and diversity. That bio means organisms or living things. Diversity, new types of living organisms. So it creates biodiversity or create new species. That's one importance. So for new species to form, there have to be speciation. Remember that adaptation leads to speciation, and speciation leads to new organisms. Now, adaptation, speciation leads to adaptation and evolution of new organisms. Adaptation, speciation leads to adaptation and evolution, which allows new organisms to form ecological niches. So when these new organisms comes out, so speciation enables adaptation and evolution of new organisms. So that will occupy the new niches, that will occupy new areas. The same thing we are saying. The first one is that it creates more biodiversity or creates new organisms. And then speciation also helps in the adaptation and evolution, which allows organisms to fill new ecological needs. So multiple organisms will come and occupy different habitats. That's one of the advantages of speciation. Speciation also leads to reproductive isolation. It leads to what? Reproductive isolation. That means maintains distinctness of populations. Maintains distinctness of what? Population. Because organisms separate to form new habitat, to form new species. Do you understand? Therefore, maintaining a kind of biological isolation or reproductive isolation because new organisms are now formed. So that's one of the advantages of speciation. The another thing is that it also helps in ecosystem resilience. Ecosystem resilience, as we saw in adaptation too. In adaptation, it leads to what? Long and short-term resilience. Then I'm also saying that speciation helps in ecosystem resilience because it also helps in higher varieties of species. So the ecosystem will continue to thrive. Its resilience, new ones will continue to come in. Not just one species thriving or two species thriving. Speciation enables more species to thrive, enabling ecosystem resilience, enable ecosystem to continue to survive, enabling ecosystem to continue to work, to live. So it's very, very important. So it helps in ecosystem resilience. Very, very important to all of us. Then another advantage of dispensation is that it enables resources for humanity. So it provides critical resources for what? For humanity, because it provides way for new organisms to rise, therefore providing resources for what? Humanity. That is it. But what are the challenges? What are the problems? The problem is that even though it helps in ecosystem resilience, even it helps in reproductive isolation, even it helps in adaptation and evolution, even as it helps in driving biodiversity, it may lead to this, it may not be possible for organisms to reverse back to the original condition. Yes, yes, when organisms adapt and then speciation occurs, then it may not be possible for you to get the original that original organisms that earlier existed. That may be the danger of speciation. So we might go back and reverse what we say today in speciation. What we discussed today in week 5. Today we have been able to discuss adaptation. And we say that adaptation is the biological process where organisms adjust to their environment over generation through natural selection, thus enhancing survival and what? Reproduction. If you cannot adapt, any organism that cannot adapt will be wiped out of this earth, because climate is changing, environment is changing, new things are changing, food availability is changing, predator-prey relationships are changing, new things are coming. So you must adapt. Even human beings, we adapt. It's not the way we live our life in the 70s and 80s that we are living our life in the 2025 time. So things have changed dramatically, and organisms have to work, adapt. The economy has changed dramatically. So people are pouring food away, throwing food away before. But today, adapt whether any person can throw food away. So adaptation is a very important characteristic of living things. Now, remember that this adaptation, the inherited traits during adaptation can be structural. That means physical features like giraffe that develop long leg, or physiological stroke internal functions like metabolic changes or biochemical changes, or behavioral traits like migration and hunting. These are the traits, the inherited traits that are available, that can be that we witness during adaptation. So you have structural features, physiological features, and behavioral features. These are the traits that we inherit during what? Adaptation. So what are the significance of adaptation? Importance of adaptation. It helps organisms to survive in a changing environment. So organisms must adapt to survive. 2, helps in resource access. Adaptive traits, e.g. camouflage, allow organisms to better utilize available food. As they camouflage, we will not be able to take the food away from them so that they can now feed. Then survival of the fittest. I think Darwin's theory of evolution. It applies here in adaptation, because organisms adapt in order to what? To survive in the environment. Darwin's call it theory of natural selection. And natural selection is what? By adaptation, natural adaptation. So it helps in resource availability. Then it also helps in predator protection. It helps species to defend themselves, e.g. by camouflaging. So adaptation helps species to what? Protect themselves. It also helps in long-term environmental resilience, allows species to survive environmental shifts over a long period of time. We also say the disadvantages of adaptation, that when organisms adapt, then it may not be possible for the organism to reverse back to its original structure or the original form, because they have adapted to new habitat. Then we discuss speciation, which say occurs when one species diverges or give rise to two species, each of which continues on its own evolutionary pathway. Then we discussed the mechanism of speciation. One is allopatric speciation. Here, the population divided into two. Original population divided into two, and each of them develops. Then you also have peripatric, when a small population arises from the original population. There is no communication between the new population, that small new population, with the original one. Then you have parapatric. In parapatric, a small population emerges, carved out from the original population, but they didn't move out. There is still inflow of materials, food materials, and other things between the new population that are formed and the original population. So there is still the interaction between the original population and the new population. Then you have sympatric speciation. Here, new species, new group, new population can emerge, but they have not carved out. They are still operating within that population. Then we look at the importance of speciation. We say it helps in biodiversity, it helps in adaptation and evolution, it helps in reproductive isolation, it helps in ecosystem resilience, and also helps in resource availability to humanity. That is what we discussed about, we discussed today. Today we can also look at phylogeny. Phylogeny, that's the next item we are going to look at. And what is phylogeny? Phylogeny. There's two things. There's one called phylogeny, then the other one is called ontogeny. You must know it as an evolution student. In fact, there's something we call biogenetic law. And biogenetic law states that ontogeny recapitulates what? Phylogeny. Ontogeny recapitulates what? Phylogeny. So what is ontogeny? The development of an organism is called what? Ontogeny. Then what is phylogeny? The evolutionary history. And we see that ontogeny recapitulates what? Phylogeny. That means the development of an organism recapitulates or repeats the life history of its ancestors. This is what we call the biogenetic law. It must stick on your head. As an evolutionary scientist, you must know it. For example, remember that when we are fertilized in our womb, in the womb of our mother, we form what we call zygote and form what we call embryo, and the embryo will start developing. Initially, as the embryo is developing, 1 month, 2 months, you have a tail. You have a tail. But as time goes on, as you are reaching 3 months, 4 months, as you are passing to 5 months or 6 months, the tail will continue to what? Shorten and get cut. It will continue to degenerate because it is used to feed the embryo. And again, as a human being, you don't need tail. So as you are developing into 6th month or 7th month and 8th month, the tail completely disappear to form what we call coccyx. And that coccyx is a remains of the tail, which is there in your body, even as you are born. Even as you become an adult, you have coccyx, which is the remains of that tail. In other words, original character is there. So organisms develop original general characters before specific character. So general character is that you must have a tail, just like a fish, just like a reptile, just like amphibians, just like other lower organisms. Fish, you must have a tail. But then this general character, as time goes on, they have to diminish. They have to give way for specific character. And the specific character is that a human being will not need a tail. So when we are fertilized in our mother's womb, as we are developing that embryo, we have that general character. That is what we call ontogeny. Ontogeny means the development of an organism. You have the original character as you are developing at that initial stage. But as time goes on, the original character has to give way to specific character. And that was the evolutionary history. That's why we have to lose our tail. That's why, because you're a man, you don't need a tail as a human being. But if you are a goat, the tail is still there because you need a tail. If you are a monkey, the tail is still there because that is a specific character. If you are a lizard, the tail is there because you are a lizard. If you are a horse, if you are a buffalo, the tail is still there. If you are a cow, the tail is still there because you need a tail. But if you are a human being, the tail is not there. If you are a chimpanzee, the tail is not there because you don't need it. That's why general characters will later give away for specific character. And so we call it biogenetic law, that autogeny recapitulates what? Phylogeny. That the development of an organism repeat the life history. The life history that at the initial stage, all of us have tails. But as we are growing, developing to specific thing we lose all those general character and develop to specific character. That's why general character give rise to specific character. It's one of the second biogenetic law that general character will normally give rise to specific word character. So phylogeny is the study of the evolutionary history, relationship and development of species or group of organisms. So phylogeny is the study of evolutionary history, relationship and development of species or group of organisms. Can you now see it? The study of evolutionary history, the study of the relationships and development of species or group of organisms is called what? Phylogeny. But autogeny means what? The development of an organism, like the fertilization, the embryogenesis, blastocyst. Then this is the development of an organism. The stages of development is called what? Autogeny. But phylogeny is the evolutionary history, the evolutionary relationship, and the development of organisms. So that is phylogeny. You have various methods of studying phylogeny. One is molecular data. You study phylogeny by molecular data. And that is the last bus stop of the study of anything using molecular techniques. So here we compare DNA and the amino acid sequences of organisms. From those lower ones to the higher one, you compare the DNA sequence and the amino acid sequence. So that's how to know whether there is any relationship, of these organisms. And so when you use DNA barcoding, there's something we call DNA barcoding, which I've used in my work. You want to see the relationship between organisms. So it may be one organism that is collected from different geographical zones. Then you collect the DNA sample from this organism, then sequence the DNA, and then look at the relationship between these organisms. And somehow you will see that the geography of an organism, the location of an organism can affect its DNA, can affect its resemblance. So when you now do the DNA barcoding of organisms in one geographical area, you see that they clump together. And organisms, the same organisms in another geographic area will clump together. But they are still within the same clade because they are one species. So molecular technique or molecular data is a very powerful way of studying phylogeny. That is why we'll call it a day today. Next week, which is the final week, we may also look at other methods of studying phylogeny. And then we pick up the lecture for week 6. And the lecture for week 6 will be geographical isolation, gamete and zygote, mortality, natality, types of isolation, chromosomal numbers, etc. So this is what we are going to discuss when we come next week. And this is where we call it a day today. Thank you and God bless you. This is where I may exit the presentation, the facilitation. Thank you.